Welcome to our deep dive on emotional agility. We're going to be looking at the book Emotional Agility by Susan David. And I know you're out there looking to navigate these choppy emotional waters. And I think this book really is like a roadmap for getting unstuck when we find ourselves like really kind of caught up in those tricky feelings. Thankfully, I have an expert here with us who can help us kind of break this down.
I'm excited to be here, and I think Susan David's work is really insightful. She challenges this idea that we have to be happy all the time, which for a lot of people can feel like a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it's like that whole positive vibes only thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's just not realistic. She has this really great anecdote about a British naval captain who almost ran his ship aground because he mistook a lighthouse for another ship.
Oh, wow.
And it really shows how those emotions, even though they can feel very real in the moment, they can sometimes really lead us astray.
That's a powerful image. And I think it speaks to why emotional agility is so important, because it really is about learning to recognize when our emotions are steering us in the wrong direction and being able to course correct.
So it's not about ignoring those emotions or suppressing them.
Yeah.
It's about learning to work with them.
Exactly. It's about becoming more aware of our emotional patterns, understanding why we react the way we do, and then having that ability to choose how we want to respond.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. But how do we actually do that? I mean, it feels like sometimes these emotions just have a mind of their own. David talks about getting hooked by our emotions, like having these thought spirals that can really pull us under.
Absolutely. They are called hooks because they are those sticky thoughts and behaviors that just keep us trapped in this cycle of negativity and prevent us from moving forward. It's like you're fishing and you get snagged on something and you just can't reel it in. Right. And sometimes we don't even realize that we're hooked. Like the other day I was feeling so stressed about a work deadline that I just snapped at my partner. And afterwards I thought, why did I do that? My anxiety just totally took over.
It's so common to not realize you are hooked. And we all have these hooks. David outlines 4 common ones: blaming our thoughts, monkey mind outdated ideas, and wrong-headed righteousness.
Okay, those names are pretty catchy. I like them. So let's break those down a little bit. What exactly is blaming our thoughts? Is that when we just beat ourselves up for having negative thoughts?
It is. And it's like we think that if we just scold ourselves enough for feeling anxious or insecure, those feelings will just disappear.
Yeah.
But it actually just makes us feel worse and more stuck.
So true. So then what is monkey mind? That just sounds chaotic.
It is. It's that constant chatter that's happening up in our heads,
Yeah.
jumping from one worry to another. David uses the example of Kevin, who constantly worries about what other people are thinking of him. This stems from some bullying he went through as a child. His monkey mind keeps him from being his authentic self. Oh, I know that feeling all too well.
Yeah.
It's like having a committee of inner critics up there constantly like second-guessing everything I do.
And that's where emotional agility comes in. It's about quieting that monkey mind to create some space between our thoughts and our reactions.
Okay. This is already making me feel a little bit more hopeful.
Right.
So what about outdated ideas?
Outdated ideas are those beliefs that we've been holding on to that no longer serve us, but we cling to them anyway. In the book, there's a story about Tina, who is a successful executive, but she really struggles to connect with her team. And this is because she's still operating from that every person for themselves mentality. Her outdated ideas about leadership are holding her back.
So it's like carrying around all this baggage from our past. That's weighing us down, and we need to sort of unpack it and let go of the things that aren't serving us anymore. Okay, and then the last one, wrong-headed righteousness. Is that about always needing to be right?
Yes, that need to prove that we're right. Even if it means damaging relationships or missing out on opportunities for growth, it's like we're so attached to our own perspective that we can't see the bigger picture.
Okay, so we've identified these hooks, these patterns that keep us stuck. But how do we actually start to untangle ourselves from them?
Welcome back to our deep dive into emotional agility. So last time we talked about those 4 common hooks that can keep us stuck in these unhelpful emotional patterns. So now I think let's talk about what we can actually do about them.
Yeah, that's what I want to know. We all get hooked sometimes, but how do we actually unhook ourselves? David talks about those 2 common reactions, bottling and brooding, but I'm guessing those aren't really the answer.
You're right. Bottling and brooding are kind of like throwing gasoline on a fire, right? Bottling is like we're trying to shove all of our emotions into this tiny little box, and brooding is just replaying this terrible movie in our heads over and over and over again. Neither one is very helpful.
I know I'm definitely guilty of both, especially brooding. It's kind of like my default setting when things go wrong. David suggests that instead of avoiding or suppressing those so-called negative emotions, that we should actually try to embrace them. Which sounds a little counterintuitive, but I'm intrigued.
It is a bit of a mind shift. But think about it this way. Our emotions, even the ones that we tend to label as negative, are trying to tell us something. They're like messengers with these like really important pieces of information about our needs and our values.
So instead of like shooting the messenger, we should actually try to listen to what they have to say.
Exactly. David argues that these emotions like sadness, anger, and even fear can actually be these like very powerful sources of energy and insight. For example, sadness. Instead of seeing it as like a weakness or a sign that something's wrong with us, we can reframe it and see it as a signal that maybe something important to us is missing.
That makes so much sense. I know for me, when I start feeling sadness creep in, it's often a sign that I need to maybe slow down a little bit, connect with my loved ones, or like reevaluate my priorities.
Exactly. It's like our emotions are trying to guide us back to ourselves, back to what really matters.
This is making me think about anger too. We're often told to suppress our anger. But what if we looked at it as a signal that a boundary has been crossed or that something needs to change?
That's such a good point. Anger can be a very powerful motivator to stand up for ourselves, to set those healthy boundaries, or to advocate for the things that we really believe in.
Wow, this is kind of a game changer. It's like we've been given permission to feel that full spectrum of human emotions, even the messy ones, without judgment.
And that's the beauty of emotional agility. It's about acknowledging and accepting all of our emotions as part of the human experience.
Okay, so we're learning to kind of embrace these emotions, even the ones that make us uncomfortable. But what are some practical steps that we can take to cultivate emotional agility in our everyday lives?
Well, remember those 4 steps that we talked about earlier? Showing up, stepping out, walking your why, and moving on.
Right? It all starts with showing up,
Mm-hmm.
right? Being present with our emotions, even when they feel really intense. But how do we do that without getting completely overwhelmed?
David offers some really helpful techniques. One of my favorites is journaling with self-compassion.
Oh, I love journaling. But what does it mean to journal with self-compassion?
It's about writing about our emotional experiences with kindness and understanding. Not with self-criticism. It's like, imagine you're talking to a dear friend who's going through something really difficult. You wouldn't judge them or tell them to just get over it.
Right.
Right? Of course not. Exactly. So why do we do that to ourselves? Journaling with self-compassion is about extending that same kindness and understanding to ourselves.
That's a really beautiful way to approach journaling.
Mm.
I'm going to try that. What about when we're feeling overwhelmed in the moment? Like when we're having an argument or we're about to give a big presentation and we're feeling super anxious. Does David have any tips for those moments?
She does. She recommends a technique called noticing your breath. It's a very simple but powerful mindfulness practice. It's just bringing your attention to your breath, noticing the sensations of each inhale and each exhale.
Oh, good old-fashioned deep breathing. I've heard about that. But sometimes it feels a little bit too simplistic. Does it really work?
It can. Focusing on our breath is like hitting the pause button on that emotional roller coaster. It helps to create a little space between our feelings and our reactions so we can respond more thoughtfully.
So it's like a little mini meditation that we can do anywhere, anytime.
Exactly. And it's a great way to just calm our nervous systems and shift out of that fight or flight response.
Okay, I'm adding that to my emotional agility toolbox. What about connecting with our values? We talked about walking your why earlier. How did that fit into this whole emotional agility thing?
Walking your why is about aligning our actions with what truly matters to us. It's about identifying those core values and using them as a compass to guide our decisions and our behavior.
So it's like getting really clear about what we stand for, and then making choices that reflect those values, even when it's hard.
Yes. And David suggests creating a values compass. It's like this visual reminder of your core values that you can refer to whenever you're feeling lost or uncertain.
I love that. It's like having a North Star to guide us through all those storms. So we've shown up for our emotions, we've stepped out of those reactive patterns, and we've connected with our values. What's the final step?
Moving on. This is where we take action. We start making small but really impactful changes that are in alignment with those values and that move us closer to the lives that we want to create.
Moving on. That sounds really empowering, but sometimes it feels like my emotions hold me back from taking action. Like I'll get scared to try something new and then I'll just talk myself out of it.
I think that's very common. But remember, emotional agility isn't about eliminating fear or any other emotion for that matter. It's about learning to dance with those fears, to acknowledge them without letting them control us.
So we're becoming more comfortable with being uncomfortable. We're learning to tolerate those feelings of uncertainty and vulnerability without shutting down or giving up.
Exactly. And that's where the real magic happens, when we're willing to step outside of our comfort zones, to embrace the unknown. That's when we truly start to grow and evolve.
This is so inspiring. I'm already feeling more equipped to navigate those tricky emotional moments with a little grace and resilience. But before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I'm curious to hear about your personal experience with emotional agility. Has this work impacted your own life?
Absolutely. Learning about emotional agility has been huge for me. I used to be someone who bottled up my emotions, especially anger. I thought I was weak or unprofessional to express my feelings, but all that did was create resentment and distance in my relationships.
Oh, I can totally relate to that. I used to be a champion brooder. I would replay every awkward conversation, every perceived slight in my head for hours. It was exhausting.
It is. But through practicing emotional agility, I've learned to become more aware of my emotional patterns, to understand where they're coming from, and to choose how I want to respond.
And what about those times when you still get hooked by those old patterns? What do you do to unhook yourself?
Well, first I try to notice what's happening. Am I blaming my thoughts? Is my monkey mind going crazy? Once I've identified the hook, I can start to apply some of those techniques that we've talked about, like noticing my breath or journaling with self-compassion.
So it's like an ongoing process?
It is. It definitely is. Emotional agility is not a destination. It's a journey. And even after years of practicing, I still have those moments where I get hooked. But the difference is now I have the tools to unhook myself much more quickly and compassionately.
That's really encouraging to hear. It reminds us that we're all works in progress, and that's perfectly okay. Welcome back to the deep dive. It feels like we've really just scratched the surface here with emotional agility and how it can help us get through those tough emotional times. I'm excited to keep going.
It really is such a helpful way to look at things. And we can use these principles everywhere, not just in our personal lives.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. We talked about how emotional agility can help us deal with those hooks, but I'm wondering, how does this show up in our relationships, our careers, our physical health? Like, how can we actually apply it?
Well, let's start with relationships. I think David makes a really good point about the importance of radical acceptance, which sounds a little scary maybe, but it's really just about accepting how messy human connections can be.
Radical acceptance. Makes me think of those cheesy romantic comedy lines like, I love you just the way you are, but I have a feeling it's a little deeper than that.
Yeah, it is. It's more about accepting our loved ones for who they truly are, not who we want them to be or who we think they should be. It means letting go of the need to control them or change them.
Such a good point. I know I've definitely been guilty of trying to fix my partner thinking I know what's best for them, but it usually just backfires and we both end up feeling resentful.
Exactly. And radical acceptance doesn't mean you have to agree with everything your loved ones say or do. It's about respecting their perspective, even when you don't see eye to eye.
So it's about choosing to love them, flaws and all.
Yes. And that kind of unconditional love creates trust and safety in the relationship.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It's like we're giving each other permission to be ourselves without judgment.
Exactly. And that's how you create true intimacy and connection.
Wow. This is really making me rethink my whole approach to relationships. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk about careers. How can emotional agility help us navigate the ups and downs of work?
I think one of the biggest challenges at work is dealing with setbacks and failures. It's so easy to get caught in self-doubt and negative self-talk when things don't go as planned.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well. I'm still cringing about that time. I completely bombed a presentation in front of all the executives.
But the truth is, everyone makes mistakes. It's part of life. And emotional agility can help us view those experiences as opportunities to learn and grow.
So instead of seeing failure as like a sign that we're not good enough, we can see it as a stepping stone on the road to success.
Exactly. It's about developing a growth mindset, being open to challenges and learning from mistakes.
That's so empowering. It's like shifting from thinking I'm either good at this or I'm not to I can learn and get better over time.
Right. And that's what helps us become more resilient and adaptable when we face challenges.
This makes me think about all the times I didn't even try something because I was so afraid of failing. Emotional agility would have been so helpful back then.
Well, it's never too late to start. And remember, it's not about getting rid of fear completely. It's about acknowledging that fear and moving forward anyway.
Okay, so we've talked about relationships and careers. What about our physical health? Is there a connection there with emotional agility?
There definitely is. Studies show that people who are emotionally agile tend to have less stress, anxiety, and depression, all of which can impact our physical health.
So it's like by taking care of our emotions, we're also taking care of our bodies.
Exactly. Emotional agility helps us develop healthy ways to cope with stress, like practicing mindfulness, exercising, or spending time in nature.
Right. It's like a reminder that our minds and bodies are so connected. Taking care of our emotional well-being is just as important as taking care of our physical health.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when we're emotionally resilient, we're better able to handle life's challenges without them affecting our physical well-being.
This has been such an amazing deep dive. I'm so glad we had this conversation about Susan David's work. As we wrap up, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is that emotional agility is a skill anyone can learn. It's not something you're born with. It's a practice, a journey of getting to know yourself and growing.
That's such a good point. It's a great reminder that we can all create more fulfilling and meaningful lives by focusing on our own emotional well-being.
Yes. And I would encourage everyone listening to check out Susan David's book, Emotional Agility, and explore these ideas further. There's so much valuable information and advice in there.
That's a perfect way to end our deep dive. I'm leaving this conversation feeling inspired and ready to put these ideas into practice. Thanks for joining us on this journey of emotional discovery.
It was my pleasure. Keep diving deep, everyone.